Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're playing the USAriadna Ranger Force versus White Company, and the scenario is Mindwipe. Now, this battle report comes sort of courtesy of channel supporter Sebastian Allardyce, who made the request for, and I quote here, my take on list building Whiteco versus USAriadna in N5. And then a question about Kahu, Webback, Harris and stuff in White Company, which I answered on the Buy Me a Coffee page. Now, I'm not actually 100% sure whether the question here is, how do I use Whiteco to beat USAriadna Ranger Force? In which case the answer is, just play Whiteco, you'll be fine. Or it's, he'd like to see a battle report of the two, which is kind of challenging to arrange, or he wants to see USAriadna, or what. But regardless, what we have here is, I have several local opponents actually who are looking at White Company, and very recently, because it's a super cool faction in N5. So if we want to see Whiteco versus USAriadna, I have to play USAriadna. And that means today we're playing USAriadna Ranger Force. Sebastian, I don't know if this is exactly what you wanted, but hopefully you find the battle report interesting. Now, before we jump into lists in any depth and the battle report itself, some people who are familiar with USAriadna Ranger Force may have winced when I read out the scenario, Mindwipe, and with quite good reason. Something to just sort of stop and think a little bit about here is, and this is something I've actually been talking to some friends about, possibly while kvetching today trying to list build for this scenario, is what differentiates A tier, B tier, and C tier factions, apart from just model power. Because often in Infinity, it's actually not model power or even like high watermark profile strength inside a faction, or even general army cohesion that differentiates those faction tiers. Often, instead, really what tends to separate, particularly even A and C tier factions, is how easily those factions can adapt to different missions and different mission lineups. And so if we think about 3-round events and 5-round events versus casual play, but even including casual play on the assumption that you will, over the course of time, want to play basically every mission in the scenario pack just for the purposes of novelty, some factions can particularly easily accommodate a wider and wider range of mission mixes without having to compromise the strengths that they're trying to build into their lists, and some factions have to stretch away from their core strengths in order to actually accomplish certain missions. A really classic example is missions like highly classified and to a lesser extent countermeasures, where some factions that don't have good access to hacking are not as comfortable in those scenarios. Now, I will comfortably play Toha in countermeasures, for example, maybe not so much in N5, but certainly in N4 off the back of Toha's strengths, and much of that strength remains in N5. And if I'm being honest, I would probably also be willing to play Ariadna in countermeasures. But particularly once you get to Ariadna, that total lack of a hacking network, like total lack of a hacking network in Ariadna, you have one hacker who is not a killer hacker. Actually, frankly, that's almost as much as Toha have access to, but very, very limited hacking ability really starts to tell, and you need to, in countermeasures, for example, figure out how you're going to approach not having access to hacking classifieds, or if you try and include a hacker, knowing that they might have a long march to accomplish anything and might require a lot of orders, compared to factions that are just including hackers generally, and so can do those classifieds without having to compromise their list construction. It is not a problem for a Tunguska list to include good hackers and therefore be able to do any hacking classified. It is a problem, and it requires a troop slot and SWC and points for USAriadna to be able to do hacking classifieds. Now, that's fine. What about Mindwipe? And I have to admit here that even playing Mindwipe this evening in the first place is kind of a product of a hilarious miscommunication. I was having a chat in our local Discord. We have a local games night. Ed mentioned he was looking for a game and wanted to play his White Company. Yes, excellent. This is a chance for me to play that USAriadna versus White Company matchup that I otherwise would maybe have difficulty organizing. Let's go. And then he sends me a message. How would you approach Mindwipe as a scenario? And I, just thinking about the fact that we would now have this game lined up, did not think at all about the fact that that question was entirely unrelated to the fact that we were going to have a game, and Ed was not asking me at all about how I would approach Mindwipe with USAriadna. He was just talking about the scenario generally. But I didn't really cotton on to that. I gave something resembling a reply, and by the time he got to the game store this evening, I had already set up the table for Mindwipe, kind of expecting this to be a bit of a tragic parable, because USAriadna are absolute dog shit at Mindwipe. Not only is Mindwipe a faction that wants hackers, there is an entire mechanic making use of a hacker giving them an extra order, and there is a hacker bonus to press the buttons. And I did not really want to flex my list to try and include a 1SWC 14-point model that started in my deployment zone and could not easily be linked. But also, scoring in Mindwipe is almost entirely contingent on having access to decharges or close combat anti-material CCWs. Do a filter for DA, explosive, and that's it, CCWs in USAriadna. Don't say T2, because T2 CCWs are not anti-material in N5. There is one. There is one model in the entire faction with an anti-material close combat weapon, and it's the availability 1 Beast Hunter. Okay, that's a little bit grim, but we've got access to decharges, right? Yeah, you have some. You have Rosie Monroe and Dozers, and one USAriadna Ranger Force Airborne Ranger, one profile has a decharge. Okay, that's not great. Do we have any on profiles that we would want to move forward aggressively and take ground with and fight in the midfield and then move to puncture into the enemy deployment zone? Maybe Rosie. Well, okay, we can take the USAriadna Airborne Ranger and just hope that we don't roll the 30% chance that it's the server in the middle of your opponent's deployment zone, I guess, and then have smoke and hope that it's accessible. It's rough. It is. I did not really think about this before I agreed to play Mindwipe, but I don't know if there's a faction in the game that's worse at it than USAriadna, purely off the almost total inability to interact meaningfully or easily with the scenario in any way. Now, I agreed to it because, one, a challenge is interesting, and two, it gave me the opportunity to have exactly this rant that I have just had, but I do think it's a very interesting showcase of one of those things that differentiates A tier from C tier factions. When we get to Ed's list, we are going to see that there is fairly capable ability to accomplish the scenario without really moving away from any of White Company's core strengths. And that's fantastic. White Company is a really cool faction. But I have taken a USAriadna list, which is on screen now, where I have actually fairly specifically tried not to compromise. This is a list that I would feel more or less comfortable playing in kind of most missions if I needed to, with a little bit of compromise that Dozer in particular is, I'd better get at least something else that can do this mission into this list, but trying not to compromise too much. And that is going to make this particular mission challenging, even if I do think this list is a better showcase of many of the interesting things that USAriadna has gotten in N5. So, with all of that said, let's take a look at this list that I'm running. So this list is making use of many of the new and interesting profiles that exist in this edition, but in particular, Foxtrot Mine Layers, among other things. Mine Layers have really, they have been something that has been absent from USAriadna literally for its entire history, and we have Foxtrots in USAriadna now. And that's actually really nice because all of the fog of war that you get from pieces in the midfield, knowing that actually, one of those camouflage markers, or two or three of those markers, could be mines, not just harmless decoys, really helps make it more difficult to just casually punch through a USAriadna camo defense. In fact, it makes a camo defense possible at all, which is really nice. So we're going to start with 2 Foxtrot Mine Layers in the first group, and a Beast Hunter. The Ariadna Beast Hunter is actually just my favorite Beast Hunter generally, because that heavy pistol lets it actually take face-to-face rolls, which it can fork with its heavy flamethrower if it needs to. I think it's compared to the Yuching Beast Hunter, which comes closer, the Yuching Beast Hunter has to reach close combat in order to make use of its special advantage. The fact that the Ariadna Beast Hunter can just fire off that heavy pistol is something I really, really appreciate. It's also, as mentioned, the only anti-material CCW in the entire faction, so bit of a no-brainer in this particular case, but it's not flexing away from the core strengths of the faction. We then have 2 Devil Dogs and Canine Antipodes, just the cheap versions. but the cheap versions are all I think you need. These are guys that I really like as well. Would love them if they had DA CCWs in this scenario, but you get for 22 points, 3 wounds, 3 relatively durable wounds, smoke grenades, good close combat. Now, there are no special skills on the Devil Dog, but it is CC 23, and with the K9, the ability to get into close combat and fork that close combat roll, where you will put the attack from whenever your opponent doesn't respond, gives them the only actual non-face-to-face roll close combat mechanic left in the game with the change to Berserk. Now, you could run a list with 3 if you wanted to, but this list is seriously pushing irregulars as is. 2 of them is nice to have. Had I been tailoring this list more specifically for Mindwipe, one or both of these should probably be an Airborne Ranger. They're not, because I was trying not to, but realistically, that's probably something that should have happened. Now, I think it makes the list marginally worse overall. One Airborne Ranger, though, is probably not a bad call. And actually, in terms of making the list well-rounded, cutting a Devil Dog for an Airborne Ranger, not a terrible choice. We could similarly potentially cut one of the Foxtrot Mine Layers for an Airborne Ranger, and that would be fine as well, and hone us in a little bit more on this scenario. We then have our Link team that I think I quite like. Now, the Minuteman Lieutenant is a little bit of a luxury. I have taken him because I had the points, because he is a forward observer, because he's not bad at rounding out the assault options in the Link team. He gives you range bands from 8 to 16, and the light flamethrower up close is not terrible to have at all. And +1 command token, I do not usually like paying for +1 command token. It's expensive, but I can afford it in this list, and there are many irregulars. The main stars of the show, though, are these pair of Marauders, MSV level 1, Heavy Rocket Launcher +1 burst, Heavy Pistol, and then just Marauder stat line. Now, that does mean only Ballistic Skill 12 compared to 13 on the Minutemen, but they have Armor 3, they have Dogger, they have Forward Deployment, and they're 23 points. Taking 2 of them means that 1 or both can be used on ARO, and when linked with the Minutemen, I will keep the +1 burst bonus for as long as the list is intact and alive. And in active turn, they are only ballistic skill 12, and this is a very USAriadna problem. You're gonna feel like if you talk about USAriadna, you will run into the phrase only ballistic skill X an awful lot. But they are burst 4, or 3 with a special die, and a heavy rocket launcher is a dangerous weapon when it reaches that kind of burst. So I like this Link team a lot. You will note there are no grunts, for example, in this list. Nothing in particular against grunts. A couple of them is fine. I don't think I love the Link team now that its ballistic skill is hard capped at 12. And if you have the SWC for only a few more points than Grunt, like literally 5 more points than Grunt Snipers, you get a very superior overall piece. So this team, but especially the 2 MSV Heavy Rocket Launcher Marauders, really like that. I would use them regularly in USAriadna. We then have a Dozer with an armed turret. It can't reload the armed turret. It's actually never going to place it this entire game. I just never have the orders. Like, seriously, things are that strict that I never have the orders to spend on it. I would probably have liked to. But it is in this list just as a concession to decharges, because there are not many decharges, as mentioned, in USAriadna. Another piece that if you could find the points, you might consider making into an Airborne Ranger, but I think realistically, if I wanted to fit an Airborne Ranger in this list, probably we would cut a single Foxtrot Mine Layer and turn the Desperado in Group 2 into a Tractor Mule. That gives us baggage, we can place some turrets, and we have the Airborne Decharge, which realistically I think would have benefited the list significantly. We then have a Haris, another Haris that I quite like, Blackjack, AP, HMG, Chest Mine, and Panzerfaust, linked with Rosie and the 112 FTO. Rosie, the Chain of Command Rosie in particular, is another slight luxury that this list is able to afford by dint of everything being cheap. But the important thing about this list is that Rosie and the 112 are wildcarding into a Blackjack Haris, and because they both count as grunts, the list has this fire team has 2 grunts in it, which means it gets the duo bonus. It gets the +1 special die, which makes the Blackjack into actually kind of a scary-ish ARO piece, and a burst 5 AP HMG in active. It is, here's that phrase again, only ballistic skill 13, but burst 5 is burst 5, and it's only 34 points. You can only expect so much for that. So that's a Haris team that I really like. Thinking again about the scenario, probably, like this is a Haris I would prefer in Combat Group 2 in most lists. It does fire support, the Doctor is there to be a Doctor, Rosie is kind of like a secondary element that can accomplish a few things, maybe move forward, but this is not a list that necessarily wants to go and punch into the midfield. In Mindwipe, that is not necessarily the case, and maybe in Mindwipe we would consider moving the Marauder and Minutemen team into Group 2, and the Blackjack team into Group 1, just as a consideration. We then have a Desperado. Desperados are good, they're still good in this edition, and 2 more Foxtrot. A single forward observer and a single mine layer. Now, the forward observer is very important in this scenario. One of my, not exactly cardinal rules, but things I find very beneficial in Mindwipe in particular is do not tally on pressing the button. If you can press the button on turn 1, it is just good to get that out of the way, because you never know how your resources will diminish over the rest of the game. Even in N5, where it's a little bit more common for models to, and like armies to stick around with a bit more of their fighting strength and order pool intact later into the game, just don't gamble on it. If you can press the button on turn 1, it's usually good to press the button on turn 1. That gives you 2 entire turns to know how you'll have to orient your force and prosecute an attack against your opponent's server with the AI in it. So anyway, this is my take on USAriadna Ranger Force. There are some things in there I think are really nice. Things that are missing, particularly with regards to focus on this mission, but if you were looking for a generic list that can realistically play most missions kinda okay. Some caveats there, but anything like Supremacy, for example, Supplies, I would be fine playing this in Supplies. Frontline, Firefight, etc. All of the classics, this should serve you well if you're a USAriadna Ranger Force looking at how you might approach the faction this edition. Now, playing against me this game is long-term friend Ed, playing in this case White Company, something he's experimenting with in N5, and this is just a really nice clean White Company list that does not need to make significant compromises in order to accomplish the mission in Mindwipe. There is once again, there is one piece that I feel is somewhat notably missing. We do not have a Lenkai. However, there is not really any piece that I would seriously consider cutting in order to fit Lenkai in this scenario. In particular, once we've committed to this Harry's team at the beginning, Orc, Valkyrie, and the Blade, I really like that as a team. I think that works very nicely in this scenario. It gives you some absolutely top shelf assault and specialist and orders and gunfighting without really compromising at all. In fact, this is almost ideal for the mission. You have 2 models in this fire team that can just on a dime comfortably destroy a server, and you have a burst 5 ballistic skill 14 HMG. However, this is a somewhat expensive team. This is a team that you would be looking at cutting if you wanted to fit Lenkai and some different guns, but without really compromising on White Company's strengths at all, you have the scenario in a can in this Harry's team. We then have a larger team of Hawkwood, K1 Sniper, Hideout, Killer Hacker. Hideout is another piece, right, that is exceptional in Mindwipe, but also exceptional in every other situation. It's a KHD with a good ballistic skill pitcher, multiple wounds or no wound incapacitation, which makes it good at fighting. It's great at close assault thanks to the +1 burst boarding shotgun, and it has decharges, which means you have a piece, again, that has the scenario bonus that is relevant here. It's easy for it to press the button, and having pressed the button, it can prosecute an offense into your opponent's deployment zone because it has decharges and is therefore good at killing the objectives. Another piece that's just we don't need to compromise at all on our faction strengths to accomplish this mission. That's one of the things that differentiates a B plus tier faction from a B minus C, C minus kind of faction that need to flex away from or into your strengths to do the missions that are on hand. Now, in this particular case, Hawkwood and the Hideout are going to be linked with 3 other Fusiliers, but 2 of them are going to stay behind in the deployment zone pretty early into the game. Out the gate, this is a fire team that has 4-person bonuses, so Hawkwood's up to ballistic skill 14, effective 3 dice in ARO, but the lieutenant and the decoy will both be left behind as it moves into the midfield, leaving behind just Hawkwood, the Hideout, and the Fusilier forward observer to push forward. And that's perfectly sensible. Not only do you not want to be maneuvering 5-person links into the midfield, but as soon as you leave 1 Fusilier behind, you may as well leave behind 2. Firstly, this because the 3-person bonus to the link team, while nice, is not nearly as critical, but also if you leave behind just 1 Fusilier, you're kind of putting a target on his head. We then have a Mulebot for baggage, and Carmen and Batard, and we have, once again, a very, very good example of a model that is staying true to White Company's strengths because Carmen and Batard are excellent. And look at that, we have a DACCW and a Trench Hammer. Now, I'm sort of banging on a little bit, but it kind of is an interesting case study to see what some of the differences between, there are no models in here that point for point, like the Orc HMG, point for point compared to the Blackjack, I think is really quite comparable. The Orc has higher ballistic skill and it doesn't suffer from transmutation, but the Blackjack has higher base armor and has a full AP HMG, and Panzerfaust for ARO, and chest mines. Like, those are cool. Those are useful and interesting things. I feel totally okay. In fact, I would probably say that given a choice, I would probably, not certainly, but much of the time, I would prefer a Blackjack to an Orc. It's a more interesting profile and it can accomplish more things than the Orc can. So USAriadna does not lack for individual profiles that can do cool things. The Foxtrot Mine Layer for 18 points is a really good profile. 23 points for those Marauders is excellent, actually. I would take them in almost any faction. But once we put USAriadna together, we start really crossing our fingers that the scenario mix in an event is something that we can do without really having to move away from that. Whereas White Company does not have the same restrictions. Moving on into Group 2, we have a Peacemaker. This is another one of those pieces that you have to choose between this and Lenkai. And again, don't begrudge the first Peacemaker as a choice. If I was taking two Peacemakers and I wasn't taking Lenkai, I would probably usually cut the second Peacemaker for Lenkai, but the first Peacemaker is a good buy. Denavus, Mech Engineer with Yao Jiao, Sierra Thunderbolt, and by the way, this is just a fairly classic combination. We have Baggage, we have the Mech Engineer with a Turret Combi Rifle, and a +1 burst Total Reaction Bot. Excellent, just nice to put in basically every list. Gives you defense on the first turn and defense in subsequent turns. And then a Clipper Drone bot. Now, the Clipper really is, I had the SWC and point spare and didn't want to cut anything. This is not, despite the pictures, this is not a list that is doing guided as the plan one. It has perfectly serviceable guns. Sometimes it will need to throw out some pictures and hope that the Denavus gets a spotlight off, but we can basically see, right? Even if the pictures are laid by the hideout, we have 5 orders there between the Denavus and the Clipper. That's not going to prosecute a guided strike most of the time. The Clipper is just there to make spotlight, a credible threat in ARO, and maybe very occasionally accomplish something if you're backed into a corner. And that's fine. That's the use case most of the time for guided missiles. Overall, though, with the notable exception of Lenkai, would be nice to have him in here. This is a great White Company list. No notes, would absolutely play. Now, jumping into the game itself, we roll Whip 13 versus Whip 12 Lieutenant. Ed wins the roll and elects to go first, very sensibly. I pick the table side on the left of this picture on the grounds that the deployment zones are fairly similarly approachable, but the scenario, the left side table, has slightly better places to plonk down a bunch of mines and mine layers. It just feels a little bit better, and so I pick the left side of the table, electing to deploy second. In terms of Ed's deployment, just to get this video from getting terribly much longer, force is concentrated primarily on the 2 flanks with defensive pieces in the center. So in the center, we have the baggage bot, the engineer, and the total reaction bot. On Ed's right flank, at the top of this screen, we have the Valkyrie, Blade, and Orc team, all on that building ready to hop down if they need to. The missile bot, which you will see up in the corner here, is doing classic Van Zandt tactics. It is on the back table edge, standing, watching all the way down along this line, and all the way up past this building as well, just in case Van Zandt should appear. It's there to stop him if need be. On Ed's left flank then, we have the 5-person fire team, nestled in a fairly good defensive position. Hawkwood is out of frame back here, and he is in position. He's got a very nice long lane sort of up to here. However, he can't see anything that's silhouette 2 size over this tank. The tank is basically exactly S2 once you account for the turret, so he will be able to pop shots off at things like Devil Dogs potentially as they're moving past, but he won't be able to move, like infantry can move past on ground level if they need to. He's got very good line of sight to anything on the rooftop, so we will mostly be avoiding that. Ed's reserve drop is going to be the Peacemaker, and it's going to come down in the midfield here, ready to try and deal with some of the mines that I'm going to lay, because I'm going to lay a lot. Now, with 3 mine layers, and one of the things I'm basically thinking here is, I don't think I am advantaged in this game. So we're going to take a very small risk, which is going to pay off a little bit. We're going to roll to over-infiltrate 1 Foxtrot. One of the reasons why I like Foxtrots is that they are Fizz 13, which means that you have a 50% chance of success if you try this. I would not try it most of the time, but it is fun to do from time to time, and it gives you a very slight out in scenarios that have things like biotech war zones, for example, where you can just force the infiltration in those panic room and biotech war scenarios. Or even in exclusion zone scenarios, if you think it's worthwhile, you can take that risk and push the over-infiltration. And models with shotguns and mine layer are very reasonable models to do that with. So we are actually going to pop down. A Foxtrot is in this doorway over here, and its mine is at ground level down here. Not in position to detonate on anything, but if this Orc stands up, I will detonate a mine on it, which is awesome. Otherwise, the midfield is just seeded with camouflage markers. You can kind of see them all in this space approximately here. These are, in approximate order, a mine, a foxtrot mine layer, a foxtrot forward observer. Now, it is way back. If I had gone first, it would be borderline sitting on, it would be sitting on top of an objective, just about, or very, very close to, because I want to press the button like first order of the game and get it out of the way. Oh, by the way, this game, this scenario has that new tactical option rule thing. I drew the one that turns EDs off, so there were no tactical options. Thumbs up. Interesting mechanic. Anyway, the Foxtrot Forward Observer is positioned conservatively so that I can go after either objective. Had I been going first, it would have been positioned aggressively. The second Foxtrot and Mine Layer, so we have a Foxtrot Mine Layer here with the mine in this doorway. Again, we can see there are mines positioned to blow up on both of the objectives. That's what I'm looking to do here, particularly since Ed's Denarvis, which is hanging out back around near the Clipper Dronbot, is going to be his obvious master hacker person, whatever it's called. I'm playing Ariadna this game. I can't be expected to think of anything. And so I just want to particularly keep single wound specialists, make it just a little more difficult to push forward on the objectives, cause a little bit of pain. The Beast Hunter is hanging out behind a sign back here, and that is with the intention of basically keeping it safe until I have a run on a server. Now, it's possible it should also have been more centrally positioned. There are only so many safe central positions I could even put it in, but having it all the way off on this flank, as mobile as it is, it means that if I roll up, for example, this objective over here on Ed's side of the table, this is too far of a line realistically to take. If I'd been more in the center, I would have had a little bit more flexibility. There's possibly a change I should have made. Now, what I was thinking was, I'm going to put one of my models with decharges around here and one of them around here. So I have basically, no matter where Ed's server should be, I've got a line to take. But I really should have recognized that the Beast Hunter was actually my best bet for doing the job, and it should have been a bit more centrally positioned. Now, otherwise, we have Devil Dogs scattered around the place. One is ready to move up through this building here. The other one is at ground level with its canine on the rooftop, just kind of as a defensive position. The Desperado is hanging out at ground level by this sign, and then Rosie and the Blackjack team are on and around this building with the Blackjack on ARO, and the Marauders are on ARO as well. The second Marauder was actually my reserve piece, and I positioned it basically to be careful as possible while still getting some ARO positions. So if we look at how my AROs are set up, there are a few interesting ones. The first one is that if this Orc stands up, in addition to the mine detonating, the Blackjack has a cross-table shot. Now, I will probably take that with either the Panzerfaust or the AP HMG. Either is a threat to the Orc, and the main thing is the Orc is potentially suffering multiple shots or multiple hits as part of standing, because there is also a ground level Marauder here that has a line on the Orc if it stands. If the Orc wants to get up, it'll stay prone, move around this top level obstruction and move around this way. It'll be able to slice the pie to see the Blackjack first, but it can take a really long time to have that engagement because of the distances involved. And if the Orc whiffs everything and I hit with +1 special die, and the Panzerfaust connects, he doesn't really have a way to recover the Orc. So these are reasonable face-to-face rolls. Ultimately, my plan is just, if I lose the face-to-face roll and I take no damage, I'll stay standing if I can. If I take a wound, I'll go prone. But I want to waste as much of Ed's time and genuinely put him under threat. Similarly, Hawkwood is all the way down here, and I have nothing watching Hawkwood because Hawkwood is too dangerous for me to fight in his active turn. I don't really want to deal with him. But there is kind of a limitation on Hawkwood, where because he's firing K1 rounds, and because so many of his dice are special die, he's actually not hugely lethal in active turn. So I am willing to take face-to-face rolls against Hawkwood, but I want to make it challenging for him. And so what that means is that for him to get a bead on my deployment zone, he's actually going to have to leave his position, move up to this building and take the door up, and then come out and around here where he can start to see my pieces. Now, at that point, he can take face-to-face rolls, he can shoot the Blackjack, he can shoot the Marauder, but he's firing effectively a maximum of 2 hits per volley because of the special die, and he's only firing K1 rounds, which gives me a good chance of kind of wasting his time. And on top of that, the Marauder that he might engage has an MSV1 to counter his mimetism, and he is genuinely threatened by templates. So I am hoping that a little bit of hard ARO presence will pin Ed back a bit, stop him from pressing the button on the first turn, and maybe even result in some good luck for me, because I think I have to push my luck a little bit to win this game, and those reasonably positioned AROs are one of the ways you can potentially get lucky. So Ed begins his first turn, he identifies those fire lines that I just set up, and he decides he wants to use Hawkwood in the first instance. So Hawkwood comes up and around. up into this building, moves around to face the blackjack and then the marauder, and he kills both of them in one volley each. Now, that's a little bit of a yikes, and it is one of the risks that can materialize when you put models on aggro against a good gun. It is very unlikely for Hawkwood to win the face-to-face roll and inflict 2 wounds on each of those models in just 1 order each. That's a little unlucky. That is kind of worse than losing 2 double head coin flips in a row, but it is a risk that I took, and if nothing else, it has forced Hawkwood to spend a bunch of orders repositioning and moving and getting up onto this rooftop, which has all taken time. So even though he aced each of my 2 pieces in 1 order each, with only being able to inflict a maximum of 2 hits with K1 ammunition per order, he still had to spend a bunch of orders doing that, which is why, if you can, you always want to position your defensive pieces so that they can't be engaged immediately by guns. Now, with both of those pieces out of the way, it enables the Valkyrie and Orc team to move up and around. The Orc just dodges the mine because he's free to do so now that there's no fire coming down range. And at this point, Ed has some orders left. I mean, he has a fair few orders left. I've taken orders away from the Denarvis team because the Denarvis is one of the easiest ways for him to press the buttons. The Denarvis sitting here could just easily move up and around. She has her additional tactic. It's not tactical awareness. She has her free irregular order. All Ed would need to do is clear away 1 mine, and he's got a clear run with ample orders. So I've taken her orders away so that that's not an option. This has stressed his first combat group, which has already required a bunch of orders to be spent on Hawkwood, but there are a few more orders. Now, Carmen and Batard did not impetuous because of the blackjack. It would have lit them up with a Panzerfaust, but they can move now, and they move up and around this way with the intention of clearing out the mine on that side of the table. Batard's got Discover, although, sorry, I tell a lie. The very first order was the Peacemaker attempting to resolve some of these mine situations. The Peacemaker and the Oxbot are both positioned to discover each of these mines from outside line of fire. Ed actually opts to trigger one of these. He triggers this one with the Oxbot. It actually kills the Oxbot. The Peacemaker then just goes prone, and Ed is reasonably comfortable just removing that bit of fog of war. Anyway, Carmen and Batard. Up and around this way. Batard, it takes a little bit of work, but Batard does discover, and then the Thunderbolt remote shoots and destroys this mine. But this is all taking some orders. Now, what Ed wants to do is come up and around this way and discover this Foxtrot so that it can then be shot by the Orc, who's moved forward with tactical awareness in its own order, etc. But to do that, Batard needs to cross through this line here, which is currently being watched by the linked second Marauder heavy rocket launcher, and that Marauder will light him up, and Ed's not willing to expose Carmen, so basically sends Batard on a one-way trip. Batard moves forward. He's already tried and actually failed to discover the in-cover mimetism even through sensor. He's failed to discover through the sensor bonus, so moves forward to take the sensor roll, sends Batard on a one-way trip. Batard actually survives the rocket shot, but Carmen pulls back this way as part of that because she only has so many orders left to spend. So Batard is effectively killed, and even Carmen is actually somewhat trapped in this position here. But the Orc will move up and around using tactical awareness, and it's actually Valkyrie who will take the face-to-face roll. Ed has 1 roll to get this to work, but Valkyrie leans over and puts the heavy shotgun shots into the Foxtrot. And even though I'm actually favored in terms of the score, 3 dice is 3 dice, and Valkyrie puts the Foxtrot down. So, in terms of how first turns go, losing the Foxtrot is not surprising. Losing both of my, 2 of my 3 big guns, not that one, sorry, this one here. Losing 2 of my 3 big guns, 6 of my SWC on the first turn, and having all of the mines cleared out. Now, the mines being cleared out is fine. They did exactly what I wanted them to do. But losing all of the big guns and 3 regular orders in a list that does not have that many regular orders spare, the big guns in particular kind of sucks. It would have been really nice if the Blackjack had just taken a wound and gone prone. Maybe if I'd even spanged a shot with the Marauder or taken several rounds of fighting, because once the Marauder has eyes on Hawkwood, it can just keep taking the face-to-face roll through Dogged even if it needs to. It gives me more and more chances to maybe score a lucky crit. Both of them going down in one order cleanly kind of sucked. But okay, we have at least accomplished the goal of stopping Ed from pressing a button on the first turn, which means that he's now under pressure for the rest of the game. He has to do that in order to keep progressing the game state forward. So, We won't take any impetuous orders. There are far too many guns staring down the table. The Orc is standing on watch down this direction. The Thunderbolt Total Reaction bot is standing, and Hawkwood is in position standing here now, commanding lines of sight. We really don't want any of that business. We are going to be playing this one carefully, no impetuous. First order that we'll spend is to try and take a non-rerollable Whip 13 Doctor roll just to see if we can bring the Blackjack back. If we can, I probably don't take any face-to-face rolls. Too many things are watching the Blackjack, but I'd let him rejoin the Link team for free at the end of the turn and just force him to be another risk that Ed has to wear, engaging, say, with Hawkwood again. But I fail the Doctor roll and he dies. Okay, moving on. Our objective this turn is to press a button, and to do that we need to clear the way, and to do that we need smoke and a couple of other things. We're actually going to be aiming to press this button over here, mostly because it's the one that is closer to Ed's Denavus. I want Ed to be forced to move forward and experience a bit of discomfort basically, so we're going to aim to press the button that is on my left side of the table. To that end, the Devil Dog and its K9 move forward, and the K9 is the important bit here because it will get line of sight to the mine that Ed has laid, and it will discover it using sensor. Cool, that's step one. Step two is we still have a perfectly serviceable USARF team duo. So the lieutenant and his friend are going to move out, and they're going to take some face-to-face rolls. The first face-to-face roll that we're going to take is against Carmen, who is sitting out in the open at this stage, and 2 volleys of shots later, it's 4 dice effectively, 3+1 special die, hitting on 15s, ignore her mimetism. 2 volleys later, we put her down, and then we continue up and around. We then put a volley into the discovered mine, which has the Peacemaker standing next to it, and we put the Peacemaker down. So good, so far so good. And then we move up and around and just poke this doorway to see the Thunderbolt Total Reaction bot. It takes, I think, a couple of orders, and we do not put it all the way to dead, but we drop it as well, and that will have to do this turn. I think we might put a volley of rockets into the Orc, but only succeed in dropping him prone, not doing any damage, but that's fine. He's out of the way as well. We have very few orders left. Let's take what we need to do, because the Group 2 Foxtrot Forward Observer has to have some orders to spend. And so I think I have like 2 regular orders and an irregular. The first order is move, move. The second order is press button, and that does it. That gets the Foxtrot. I think actually I've got like basically no orders left at this point. The Foxtrot presses the button with 1 or 2 orders to spare, pulling back to here. And I could spend a command token and convert an irregular order regular, but I judge that I'm going to need those later in the game because there are a lot of irregulars in this list. So we just use the Desperado's irregular order to reposition it around to here, just so it's staged, ready for a subsequent turn, because we have rolled up this objective on this side of the table here behind this building, which is probably the most difficult one to approach because it is behind a building. All of the other objectives have got paths around to them that are more or less straight line paths. This run requires taking a dog leg regardless of the direction. That sucks. It is not the one I would have chosen. If I'd been given a choice, I would comfortably have chosen this one on Ed's right side of the table because it's the one closest to my Beast Hunter, but as is not the reason why, I will take it and we'll go. Had I been playing an Airborne Ranger, I would probably have been fairly comfortable with that one, as it has the cleanest path of approach if I can just get some smoke down to cover my landing and some smoke to cover my approach. So there are times that one would be fine, but in this particular case, it's probably the roughest one, but we'll make it work. Now, for Ed's turn, he has work to do because he has not yet pressed a button, but he has a plan. He actually has a couple of different plans, and one of them was a little bit superfluous. He has it in his mind that because the Marauders have MSVs, let's do some shooting with white noise, and so as this link team decamps, as the Hawkwood link team decamps its place on the high ground and begins to move forward, along the way the hideout shoots ballistic skill 13 because it's left behind 2 Fusiliers at this point. A pitcher up into this little garden bed section around here, which the Denavus uses her special irregular order to place some white noise down, and the Orc stands up to have a face-to-face roll. Now this face-to-face roll is happening inside 16 inches. It's very awkward for both of us. I dodge. The Orc, I think, actually lands a hit, but then doesn't do any damage because I am armor 3 on these guys. And at that point, Ed almost has the red mist descend, and then goes, I don't need to kill this Marauder to do any of the things I need to do this turn. So let's just stop there. And that is an example of good discipline and recognizing when you're about to throw a turn away. Ed is very good at counting out his orders and thinking about what he wants to do, and so he did not fall into that particular trap. Instead, stay on mission. Hawkwood and the team move up and forward. Remember, this is Ed's second turn. He really has to press a button, but he accomplishes it fairly comfortably. My defenses have been whittled away along this side of the table, and so the hideout gets into base contact, presses this button, and it's revealed to be my objective on my right side over here, which is pretty okay for Ed, but only pretty okay. We'll get to when we talk about my second turn. Now, there are only a few orders left at this point, so Hawkwood and team pull back, but the hideout does come up and around to have a go against this Foxtrot, and it's very non-conclusive. I actually crit Ed in ARO twice, those are my first crits of the game, but the hideout either crits back or passes every save. So, null outcome, which, yep, that's not unlikely. In fact, frankly, I am in cover against these attacks. I've positioned with a dodge. I was discovered previously a couple of other bits and pieces. I'm in cover against these. So is the hideout. The hideout's burst gives it a really solid advantage here, but no outcome, frankly, is lucky for me, and I'll take. The only other things that happen is that the engineer picks the total reaction bot back up because it didn't go all the way to dead last turn, and drops a turret down back, whereas it's going to be back sort of around here, just ready to defend and do some various different defense work. There isn't any really aggressive positions he can place it. Now, going into my second turn, I basically have to think about how I might be able to win the game. I am hemorrhaging orders, I've lost more troops, I do not have a ton of resources left. This list does not have a lot of orders because USAriadna has a fairly limited additional order pool. There's one tactical awareness model, and he is no good in this scenario, and is as expensive as balls, and there's some NCOs, but they're not fantastic either. So you're usually capped pretty much at your 15 troops or thereabouts with USAriadna, and I'm beginning to feel the pinch a little bit. I have to make a call about what is the best play to win the game, basically. What play can I make that will stop Ed from winning on his third turn? And there are a couple of things that I could consider. The first is we could make a Beast Hunter run down here, pass the turret onto this objective and attempt to destroy it. I do give that a fair bit of consideration. In the end, I decide not to, specifically because Ed still has a Link team camped out on this rooftop, and the Beast Hunter is almost always going to require 2 attempts. He has to make 2 rolls usually, sometimes 3, sometimes 4, but realistically you want to budget 2 or 3 face-to-face rolls to destroy an objective, because the Beast Hunter is a wet noodle in close combat, relatively speaking. He is by no means a CC expert. He has a DSCCW with no special rules. Because of that, because of how the servers are not hugely durable, but he is not going to one-shot one, and he's not even particularly reliable to two-shot one. It's like a little better than a coin flip. And on the assumption that I will need probably 3 orders, not only is that a difficult run just with the orders that I have, but it is doable, I'm going to have to stop on the way through to reveal and destroy this turret, because the turret will shoot me to death if I try and just one-shot the objective. Have to kill the turret. That's doable. I have my pistols. However, that gives multiple dodges to models on this rooftop, and if they stand up, I then have to deal with them. They have a good chance of killing me. They have a particularly good chance of killing me again if I YOLO into the objective. It is slightly too many things in the way to make that run reliable. The most likely outcome would be that I wound the objective, but don't kill it, have nothing else in play to destroy it, and I waste my time effectively, all for the hope of destroying a server that does not have the AI in it, in exchange for the few points that gives you. Now, we did, just out of interest, roll that attack run out. We actually rolled it out at the end of the game. If I'd done that instead, what would have happened? And the turret crit and killed me. So, okay, good thing I didn't do that. But it was a consideration, and you can play Mindwipe, particularly if both players are in a position where it's difficult to get the main server. You can try and just score points that way. The call that I made, and which was not necessarily the right one, was to go after the Link team that Ed had moved into the midfield. Because 2 of Ed's remaining good CCWs in close combat were there. In terms of the ability Ed had to destroy the servers, there was the hideout on this rooftop with decharges, Hawkwood with his DACW, I'd already killed Carmen and Batard, and then there's Valkyrie and the Blade Engineer on this rooftop. Now, Valkyrie and the Blade Engineer are as far as possible as you can possibly be from the objective that actually has the AI in it. Hawkwood, on the other hand, and the Hideout are absolutely capable of making this run and taking that kill. I can bleed them along the way, but stopping them is difficult. So if I can shred this link team in the middle, I can put Ed in a position where he has to move through some further defenses. There's a Beast Hunter back here, there's a Foxtrot, there's some potential for ARO. Things have to go a little well. I would like to take down much of this link team and establish an ARO presence. And if I can do that, actually, even if I can't kill Ed's servers, which is a very realistic possibility at this point because I just do not have the orders to move decharge models across the table anymore. If I can't destroy Ed's servers, I can, if he doesn't do his classified, still win the game that way, because Ed's HVT is up here, and my HVT is up here as well. And I could actually, even if Ed is currently securing that HVT, but I could move forward, steal mine, move it backwards so that Ed isn't securing it, and secure his HVT, because I can't do my classified, by the way. I drew 2 hacking classifieds, so it's secure the HVT or nothing. But I can potentially pull off a cheeky secure HVT for the win that way. Or maybe my turn, just all of the lucky dice rolls that have not really materialized so far, maybe they happen, and I blow through Ed's defenses, set up a cordon, and then maybe I have enough orders in a subsequent turn, perhaps by spending a bunch of command tokens, consolidating groups, to get Rosie or the Dozer across the field and accomplish something. Or even if I just thin him out enough, I can do it with my Beast Hunter on the final turn. These are all options, so I make the decision that going after the link team in the middle is the best choice, but it was one of just a couple of choices. It goes okay. And by okay, I mean I move up to take the face-to-face roll. Firstly, with the Orc who is standing, I do a wound 2 and knock him prone. He just comfortably doesn't take that fight anymore. That's a good outcome. Then we move and fight the Thunderbolt, and it crits me. Now, I don't go down, I go dogged. Dogged is a nice rule, but that means no more big guns for the remainder of the game. I've got to make use of the Marauder this turn, but we can do that. We're going to push up and out and around, and we're going to move up this direction, and the Dogged Marauder is going to actually put down the Fusilier over here, and the Minuteman, Glory be, is going to well over justify his points cost. He's going to move up onto this tank and out and around to see Hawkwood. Hawkwood dodges, and I realize I don't have a great chance of putting him down. I put the Flamethrowers into him. He fails his dodge, his fizz is not that good, fails his saves and dies. That's excellent. Okay, all we need to do is put down the Hideout. No, we're not going to be doing that. Comedy of errors ensues. Basically just yakety sacks between this Foxtrot with a shotgun and the Hideout. Even getting the Hideout out of cover does not accomplish anything. Back and forth. Fine, it's too difficult for the Hideout to progress now. I'm reasonably safe from the Hideout moving forward. It'll have to do. Now, we are able to stage a few irregulars forward, we move some spoke forward, we get a few things in position to be annoying to try and stop Ed's charge on the final turn, but there's really only so much otherwise that we can accomplish, and basically both combat groups are beginning to fray much more than I would like. We end the turn looking like this. So that's the Foxtrot up here staring down the Hideout. We have the Marauder Lieutenant watching these angles, but he only has a rifle. We have both dogs kind of forward positioned, hoping that they get shot at, because if they get shot at, then it's wasting Ed's time. And we have not this entire game put down a turret. Even that last face-to-face roll that killed Hawkwood, that was basically the last face-to-face roll out of that group in the turn, required converting an irregular order and spending the LT order. And the Minuteman is the Marauder, who was dogged, is now dead. We have no guns remaining. So we are trying to defend off of a very thin defense. Now, Ed basically looks at this and goes, yep, you've made it too difficult. Cannot get to this AI. No problem, there are other ways to win this scenario, and gets these troops here in this link team rolling. He consolidates both of his combat groups, he still has pretty ample orders, and he begins moving out and around. HMG puts this dog all the way to dead in a single order. Demarks, moves around here. Along the way, discovers and kills the Beast Hunter. I do put a wound on Valkyrie, just trying to kind of waste time, and if I can wound Valkyrie, her with Berserk and her big damage CCW can pretty cleanly one-shot a server. I'm kind of desperately, but I'm trying to put her down and maybe get a very cheeky kill on the blade. But at minimum, the blade moving around is a bit more challenging, and I just have to stop Ed from killing a server. But there's not going to be enough in the way. They're going to move up and around. They'll cleanly kill the Beast Hunter. Valkyrie will be wounded, but that's fine. She'll move out and around, discover, shoot. I take the face-to-face roll, but she wins the face-to-face roll and kills the Foxtrot. Crosses this field. is fine. Nothing there is going to hurt her. I take a shot and miss, and she makes the berserk attack into the server and kills it in one go. Ed at this point has 2 orders spare, so I would have had to have been quite lucky. In terms of my defense, I would have needed to have taken basically a whole extra order or 2 extra orders putting down the dog, or a whole extra order putting down one of the 2 camouflage markers. Basically, he needed to not kill 2 of those 3 models. Like, he needed to spend 2 more orders having to kill those 3 models. He killed each of them in 1 order each, but none of those are particularly surprising face-to-face rolls. That's a pretty standard output of a link team like this moving forward and attacking. So if I'd been able to do that, if I'd been able to waste, 3 of Ed's orders, not 2, if I'd been able to waste 3 of Ed's orders, so 1 more order each from each of these pieces, which is not realistic, I could have stopped him from getting here and pulled off the play that I mentioned, although even that would have been a little bit difficult, but he'd moved away from the HVT at this point. I'd have snuck around with one of these dogs potentially and done it. As it is, the game is basically done. With this server destroyed and his classified done, he does it on the way past the HVT, I no longer have the option to win the game. I cannot, with the orders that I have, get the 2 decharges that I have nestled in the back of my deployment zone anywhere remotely close to the server that Ed's got positioned over here that I need to kill. So all we do is we move the surviving devil dog up and around this way, and it secures the HVT. Now that gives us, I think, a total of 4 points this scenario. I think we get 1 because Ed didn't kill my server with the AI in it, 1 for pressing the button, or 2 for pressing the button, and 1 for classified. So that's 3 or 4 points my way, and we did math it out. Ed gets 7 points. So comfortable, clean win to White Company. Not, I have to say, a hugely surprising outcome. Ed is a known very good player. He was a finalist at CanCon this year. Congratulations, Ed, by the way. That was a great performance. And there is, particularly in this scenario, a little bit of a gulf between White Company and USAriadna. I do absolutely think there are missions and matchups and situations where USAriadna versus White Company would be a much more fair game. Certain scenarios, certain situations. Even honestly, if I had won the Willpower 13 versus 12 Lieutenant role and chosen to go first, that would have put me in a really nice position because I could have bracketed out one, because you can kind of zone out mines and mine layers in this scenario by using camouflage markers yourself. Get smoke down, press a button on the first turn while really heavily defending the other marker, and then from there, positioned. I'd have had ample time to move up, take the first face-to-face rolls, probably not fight Hawkwood. I might risk fighting Hawkwood with one of my Marauders. It's not a great face-to-face roll, but it would be 4 dice on 12s versus 3 dice on 14s, and I can take it multiple times. That's something that I could consider in my active turn. But ideally not fight Hawkwood, but maybe fight the total reaction bot and put it down. I did that multiple times, for example. I would just overall have felt much more comfortable going first. It would have let me use any surplus orders on turn 1 and turn 2 to stage those decharges, build defenses around them. Like, there are just so many options if you have that extra turn. As it was, back foot for most of the game, have to be honest. I spent a lot of the time defending against Ed's attacks, trying to shave off the pieces that he'd pushed forward, just with increasingly less resources with which to do the job. So outplayed, outfought, outlist built, outfactioned, and I think I ranked USAriadna as a C something, possibly worse, in the tier list faction. And as much as there have been many factions that I have reevaluated as I have played them, I don't think this is one of them. Still, it was an absolutely cracking game. It is always a pleasure to play against Ed. Very strong opponent, very enjoyable, very analytical. We have great games, and we played this one all the way through, very enjoyably, all the way through to store closing. So, Ed, a fantastic game, well fought and well won, and I hope this has been an interesting battle report. As I mentioned at the beginning, the request from Sebastian Allardyce was not hugely easy to pass in terms of what it was he actually wanted with regards to list building Whiteco versus USAriadna, but there will be plenty of opportunities to see White Company lists played on this channel because I have a couple of locals who are interested in them, and if I can just convince them to put Liang Kai in lists, we're talking about some quite competent list construction. So you will see ample, interesting White Company list building on this channel. However, there was probably not going to be much USAriadna unless I rolled up my sleeves and played that myself. And so, Sebastian, I hope you've enjoyed this, and for everyone else, as a reminder, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member on YouTube. I take requests from both on what factions you'd like to see in battle reports, what faction focuses you would like to see covered in the faction focuses, and just generally topics of interest for videos. As always, I hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.